Just the other board members are Cheryl, who is running our presentation here, Cheryl Brown, and then Tom Tiffany, who I understand is called in. He's our treasurer. And then we have Diane Bridges, and I don't know if Craig is on the line. I didn't notice. Craig, they are both just board members. So let's kick off the presentation. And as you see, here's our agenda. We're gonna have our treasurer's update. We're gonna give you some neighborhood demographics, some updates on historic buildings, what's been happening in the neighborhood, and then our goals for the future. We're gonna elect new board members, and then have a presentation by Tim Scanlon about the historic homes in our neighborhood and the people who built them and lived in them. So if we can move on to the next slide.
There is not a slide for the treasurer's update. Tom just said he would phone it in. He didn't. Is Tom on the line?
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Okay.
And I can go ahead with that and give a brief overview. At the moment, we just have a couple of reoccurring expenses, which are our PO box and then registering with the Colorado Secretary of State every year. And moving forward, at some point this year, we'd have to consider if we wanted to also have Zoom or something, another product of that nature as a reoccurring expense, as well as just promotional materials, because it seems like we'll have those at least once a year in preparation for this meeting. But I tallied up those costs, and it's just under $360 a year or $30 a month. So the basic budget is pretty straightforward at the moment and pretty simple. And just an update on our current balance at the moment, we have $241.20 in the bank. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Tom. And Monica, would you like to go next to the demographics?
Yes, am I going to see the next slide?
Yes. Do you see it?
There we go. Okay, so here's the boundaries for the near North End neighborhood, the park, Bijou, Alley, and Wasatch, and is that, yes, Cache La Poudre. And as many of you must know, we are a very eclectic, diverse urban and neighborhood with a mix of historic, mostly historic as we were first original annex to the city of Colorado Springs as it was growing. And that's why we're called the near North End, because we were the North End. And then as the city expanded further north, there became other North Ends. Next slide. And the demographics for our neighborhood are based on the most recent census, and this information can be found on the assessor's website. In our boundaries, we have a little over 7,000 residents, and we're about equal with male and female. We tend to be a younger crowd, with the largest 18 to 24 group is probably because of a lot of the CC students, I would think. And the next group is the 25 to 44 with some of the children over on the other side. And the other age groups are still quite large, I think, compared to the children at least. And sorry, so what is, the median age is 31, right? And the income is not really high, but I guess it's somewhere in the average. Okay, next slide. And then we are also not only a young but a highly educated neighborhood, and just over half of the people who live in our neighborhood are employed, and only a tiny small amount of those are employed with the military.
Okay,
Okay, that's it.
is that it? Okay.
Yeah, and now Cheryl's going to update you on the historic buildings and districts in the neighborhood.
So good evening, everyone. So I wanted to kind of show you just how we are surrounded by a number of historic districts. And so you can see in this square below at the bottom that this is the near north end. And we have contained within us within our boundaries, the Weber Wasatch Historic District. To the north is the North End Historic District, and Monument Valley, in addition to having the Boulder Crescent Historic District. And within the districts, in addition to the districts, we have a number of historic properties that are all in red. And you can see, other than within Colorado College, a number of our historic buildings are also within the near north end. And I kind of wanted to give you some statistics of the near north end. So if you kind of focus more on the circles and the colors and not too much on the words, the percent residential of the near north end is roughly about 68%, and the commercial is 32. And when I mean by residential, it also includes apartment complexes. The way I kind of looked at the data is that it was residential if people actually lived here, and, lived in the buildings. And then, so that's how I kind of sliced the data for residential and commercial. So you can see we're still pretty residential for being an urban neighborhood. And then within the residential neighborhood, we have about 38% owner occupied and 62% rental, which is not too surprising because we have a lot of apartment complexes and, we have a retirement home. And so that would, lean us more towards the rental percentage. And then the reason, why we are so historic is because of the age of our buildings. If you look at it, our buildings, and I have properties here because we have multiple buildings per property. So you'll see we have more buildings, and, we have ADUs and all that all those other buildings, which makes it, we have a larger number of buildings and property. And within the buildings, we have, over, for buildings over 125 years old, we have 16% of them, of the buildings, and over 100 and less than 125 is 40%. So if you can see within our percentages, even over set, if you look at our entire composition of our neighborhood, 80% is over 50 years old.
Wow.
And so if you look at our data, we are extremely old, considering that the city is only 150 years old. And I didn't slice the data anymore to see just how many were close to 150. But, probably the, properties on CC are definitely getting there. So this kind of gives you an idea of just how historic our neighborhood is.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it's nice.
And then on the near north end zoning, I just wanted to do a quick kind of look, is that a majority of our residential zoning is actually R5. And then, close second and third is R2 and R4. And so we're pretty high density neighborhood. And then, we have form-based zone, which could have residential or commercial in it, but it's just basically the way the buildings are built. They have a lot less zoning restrictions. And so that's why on Tejon, you could see so many varying heights of buildings and densities. It's because a lot of it is form-based zone. And that's it on the demographics. I'm not the demographics and the buildings. So if Diane, if you'd like to take over.
Sure. There's been a lot of things happening in the neighborhood. Monica, Cheryl, and a group of folks have really been very busy. So I'm going to do my best just to cut to the bottom line here. If you have a lot of questions, or if you have questions, we can talk later on at the end of the meeting, or you're more than welcome to call me or any one of us. There's just a lot of activity going on. The first item I want to talk about is zoning. The city is completely rewriting what's called Chapter 7 of all the, it's a chapter in the code that addresses zoning and subdivision laws. And it's basically, again, I'm just oversimplifying here, it's what's in the code on how you can use your land, and any owner, and so on and so forth. And the impact, the direct impact to each of us addresses the whole array of things. There's been many iterations over the last year on drafts of that code, and we've gone back with them. Our neighborhood, along with other older neighborhoods, have spent a lot of time with the city addressing zoning changes, the density changes, the appeal process that you or me or anybody or even a neighborhood association can go through, who can represent whom, how long they give us, say someone next to you wants to build an apartment building, what's the notification period? What are some protection measures called overlays that one can do from a historical perspective or character perspective? The use of the land, can you have a daycare center or not? The dimensions on the lot size, how far back, for example, from the street, height of buildings that can be next to your home, and parking, a lot of different things. We have papers that we've gone back to the city, which if you're interested on some of our larger concerns with the last draft, let us know and we'll share that with you. From a timeline perspective, the next draft is soon. They haven't told us when that will be forthcoming. When the draft comes out, we'll go through it again. We will send an email to the neighborhood saying, hey, there's a draft out. As we go through it, identify concerns, we'll communicate those to you. I encourage you to ask questions, encourage you to be public with concerns. Decisions on this are expected to happen with City Council late spring, early summer. So it's forthcoming, important. The next item, and I knew that would be a very time-consuming conversation. The next item addresses transportation. The city calls it Connect COS. You may see articles periodically in the Gazette and elsewhere or get email about them. But basically, it's a citywide visionary transportation plan spanning the next 20 years. Addresses bridges, safety, modernizing our roads and infrastructure, preservation, addressing bike lanes and non-motorized roads, and expanding and enhancing, again, existing infrastructure. The direct impact to our neighborhood, they're looking at putting a bus rapid transit system from the northern part of the city on Nevada to Weber to downtown. A rapid bus system, Weber, through our neighborhood. Number one. Number two, they're also looking at adjusting the bike lanes currently on Weber, potentially to Wasatch. So what's happening right now is this big 20-year plan will be sourced by different types of funding sources. The one they're looking at immediately is from the Rapid Transit Authority and what they're going to do for the next 10 years. They've identified, so they've got a list, and it does include the transit system on Weber and the bike lane changes. That list, let me just say it, they're looking at it. It will be presented to City Council in the March-April timeframe, ultimately to go to ballot for us to all vote on in the November timeframe. So just like with zoning, when this comes up, we will send you email, let you know what's going on. And I encourage you, ask questions. once we know things more definitively, and then be public with your concerns.
Hi, Diane. I'm sorry. You should also mention Platt. I know there hasn't been as much discussion of what's happening to Platt within the downtown area, but I think for people who maybe live in Monument Park Place, that would especially be a concern to them.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, well, thank you. So more to come on that. Next slide, please. I'm going to have to rush through these next things. So I think many of you may know about the Council of Neighborhoods and Organization, KONO. You know, it's an organization that has shifted over the decades of, you know, being an advocate for the neighborhoods versus what their mission is now. Anyway, their mission, they still exist. They're shifting their focus. What they'd like to do is help educate neighborhoods, help ensure that neighborhoods are part of any big planning activities that the city's doing, and work on the communications between the city and neighborhoods. So they are establishing boards, and they have put in place a university to educate those of us in the neighborhoods on how to work with the city. That university starts, their first session starts next month. So I invite you to go to that website if you're interested in what's happening with KONO. You can see the website that I have there. They also will have monthly community meetings going from community to community. When they come to ours, we'll make sure we send an email to you letting you know. That is a very broad brush statement about KONO. The next thing I want to talk about that was very big last year was having carports. Carports are not new. What's new with what transpired this past year is the ability for individuals, property owners, to put carports in the front yard setback. There are specific conditions and requirements, and so far as how big, how far back from the street, and how compatible it is with the primary, with your home, right? The fact is, it's now allowable. And if you need specifics and are interested in establishing a carport in your front yard setback, reach out and we can point you in the right direction of what the code says. We're very proud of the fact that, and in neighborhoods where there are historic preservation overlays or character overlays or design standards, those carports must comply with those standards and those guidelines. We're proud of that. Next slide, please. I got about a minute left here. Parking permits. I think most of you know that that if you're Black, if you and your Black, if you need the benefit of having parking permits so you can control who parks in front of your home, that ability exists. What you see on the slide here is if you are interested in you and your neighbors on your block and having that kind of protection measures, if they're needed, you can reach out to that particular email address and they will work with you. Previously,
So Diane, is there a specific individual that runs that group, or is it just kind of like that email is just kind of a general repository for questions?
I appreciate that question. It was Tim Roberts.
Oh, yeah, I remember the name. Yeah.
He asked that we provide this generic email. If you do reach out and you don't get a response, let me know, or Monica or Cheryl, and we'll help you. All right, I'm at my 10 minutes here. You want me to?
Okay. Do you want to just do one more minute of historic neighborhood partnership?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So last but not least, Monica, Cheryl, and I, the Near North End, we are part of a larger partnership of about 10 different neighborhoods and the Historic Preservation Alliance, one organization, where we're all volunteer neighborhoods of these older neighborhoods where we don't have legal covenants to protect us, right? Against all these zoning changes or transportation initiatives. Anyway, we work together, we support each other, and the macro goal is to preserve the character and history of our older neighborhoods. So I just want to let you know that it's been a great partnership. It was just established last June. It's just been nice that the Near North End is partnering with Mid-Shooks Run, the Old North End, Bonnieville, excuse me, and other neighborhoods. It's been very effective. We're a collective voice now, and we've been addressing zoning, transportation, and historic preservation. So thank you. Thank you for the extra time too.
Okay. And, just so you all know, the Historic Neighborhood Partnership is a much bigger group of very, very knowledgeable people. And that's really helped us, especially because of all these initiatives that are going on in Colorado Springs can be overwhelming, like Retool. And working as a bigger group has made it so we could really respond to some of these initiatives that are just very hard to do at a small scale with our group as being so small. And then I'd like to talk about the key goals of 2022. And we're really looking to work more on historic preservation. We're going to start to investigate overlay zones, historic preservation overlay zones, and also, and basically an overlay zone is if you qualify, then we can identify properties that could qualify for the zoning. And if we do accomplish this zoning, what it would do was it would be a way of, controlling how things are done to keep the houses looking more historic if they were to be, redone, and just in general, it's to preserve what we have and also to keep the neighborhood looking and feeling and being historic. And but there are a lot of rules to historic preservation. So if we're not able to accomplish this, the Retool COS is also defining a character overlay zone, which is just basically keeping the character of a neighborhood and its look and feel. So if a building gets torn down and replaced, it would have certain rules that would have to look like so that it looks like it blends in the neighborhood and just doesn't come out of some modern building or something, which doesn't always necessarily blend in. And also we're formally requesting power lines be buried in our neighborhood. If you notice, you go down these alleys and there are these big power lines. And we're at the current rate at which they're going to bury them, it would be about 100 years before all of our lines would be buried. And so we're advocating that these lines get buried sooner with the Colorado Springs utilities. And we're also going to remain advocating for engaging and protecting the neighborhood from city zoning changes, transportation, and other initiatives. We just initially did some work with CCs trying to rezone, and we were able to limit their building heights in the area that they wanted to rezone a block. And so we are able to actually accomplish some things in the zoning changes that have been come upon us. And we're also investigating adopting a tree program where we're looking to, just as there's one right now in Onan, we're looking to see right now if an assessment of if there are any trees that need to be replaced, from the big wind event. We're advocating bringing, in more trees into our median. And also if there is a way of increasing the number of parkway trees, which are the ones in front of your house, if we should adopt a program, to help purchase trees at a, more reasonable price. And then we also, CC is having a Campus Arbor Day event. And so to let you all know that they're willing to help plant trees. And they're also donating 12 trees to the Near North End. And we're initially looking to see if we can put them in our medians, but if not, I'll send an email and we can, and they will plant the trees for you in front of your house. And so if there's any chance to, if we can't find any for the medians, then we'll let you guys know, and then you can let us know if you'd like one of these trees planted in front of your house as well. And so that's kind of the key goals. And Monica, it's all yours.
All right, so now we're at the election point. So we need to do two voting sessions. The first is to elect the general board of directors. And then the board of directors, once they're elected, will then elect the officers for the board. And since we have several people here, if you are living within the boundaries of the near North End, you can vote. If you're not, please don't vote. There's no way to prove it right now, but that's fine. And so first, I will call right now for nominations. So if you live within the near North End and you would like to serve on the board, we'd be thrilled. Feel free to speak up or nominate someone who you think might be excellent for it.
Well, I nominate Cheryl Brown.
No take.
Woo. I nominate Craig, or I'll nominate Craig.
Okay, thank you.
I'll nominate Monica.
Well, I'll nominate Diane Bridges.
I'll nominate Christy Chirby. Are you here, Christy?
She was.
Oh,
I
she's
think
there.
she's muted.
You're muted, Christy. So since she's muted, she she can't.
Oh,
try
I
out.
hear. Sorry. My dog, I apologize. I have puppies and she's playing and making noise, so I muted myself.
Okay.
So you don't have to
Okay,
do it.
and I'll nominate Tom Tiffany.
Okay. Is there anybody else that would like to be on the board? We do have
Okay.
monthly meetings. And so that's kind of at a minimum, and then any other programs that you would be interested in advocating, that would be wonderful as well.
And you also don't have to be on the board. We're welcome to have people join in on anything that is of interest to them without serving on the board. So we're at this point, then we have our nominations, and I would like to then have the membership vote. And rather than asking for the yeses, I would just like to start by asking if anyone opposes any of these nominees for the board of directors. Okay, well, there are no no's, so I'm just going to take that as a yes. And then we will have Craig Thayer, Monica Hobbs, Cheryl Brown, Tom Tiffany, Diane Bridges, and Christy, what was her last name? Sorry.
Chirby.
It's
Chirby,
Chirby.
right. We'll be serving on the board of directors. Okay, so amongst the board of directors now, we are going to choose the executive board. I am term limited, so I am stepping down as president. And in this case, I would like to nominate Cheryl Brown for president. And if we could take a vote on that with the board of directors, is there anyone who opposes Cheryl Brown as president? I think not. So Cheryl Brown is the president, and then the vice president. Who would we like to nominate for vice president?
Diane.
Okay, Diane Bridges. So is anyone opposed? No. So Diane Bridges is the vice president. Then we have for treasurer, we'll nominate Tom Tiffany. Anyone opposed? Nope. Now we need a secretary. Do we have a nominee for secretary? We don't. So I guess maybe we can fill that position later. So at this point, we have our executive board minus the secretary, if anyone changes their mind. So that's it. We have completed our elections, and now we are going on to the entertaining part of the evening to hear Tim Scanlon's talk. And after that, there will be Q&A to either ask, Tim questions, or again, if there's any driving question you need an answer to tonight with what we've heard about the neighborhood, we can also discuss that afterwards. So it's on to you, Tim.
Okay, I presume if I share screen, I can go ahead and.
Yeah, can you
I
share?
need to get sharing enabled by the host.
You get trained enabled by the host. Okay. How do I do that? Gosh.
Do you have a green button on the bottom that says share screen?
Yes.
I think
go
if
to
you might
advanced.
click on that.
Uh-huh.
Does that
Okay,
enable it?
now all participants can share. Can you go ahead now?
Let's see. Yes.
Wonderful.
Okay. Let us begin, and I'll try to catch up because I know we're short on time. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Tim Scanlon. What I'm presenting tonight is the results of some research that I have done on the Near North End neighborhood. It's characterized as the most desirable neighborhood for the comfortable middle class and the families of merchants, businessmen, professionals, educators, and administrators, and it remains mostly intact. The names that I have associated with the individual buildings may not be the owners, so I'm a little duplicitous in the title of this. They're at least the occupants.
Hey,
Probably
Tim.
the only way to really verify this is by going through the deeds.
Yeah, hey, Tim, are you sharing your screen? 'Cause
Yeah, I can't see anything.
I
You
don't.
can't see anything?
No.
Full control, share sound, share.
There we go.
Oh,
Yay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We should have, I should have done this yesterday. Okay,
It's all.
regardless. What I'm going to do is what I'm presenting is my best guess as to the date of construction, the initial address, and the initial owners. And what I have done has been to consult a number of sources. Colorado Springs City Directories are for many years. It's located online at the Pikes Peak Library District. You can look for names, addresses, and quite often you can find the professions of the occupants. Used Sanborn maps. This is available on the Library of Congress website. The page here is taken from the 1900 version. There are two that are most valuable, one for 1907, which covers the entire Near North End, and one for 1962. It's been updated so you can see the changes and flip back and forth to help refine the data. Also, I've got some newspaper indices that help me do research. This is the area that I looked in. Came up with roughly 300 historic houses that I could research. I did not get all of the residential properties in the Near North End. These are the plats associated. This is the original town site plat. This was filed in 1871, and the Near North End occupies the northern 1/3 of the original town site. Another is the first edition of Colorado Springs, which goes north to Cache, and it includes the east side of Wasatch. The next subdivision is edition number 5, and this will be in 2 parts. This introduces the concept of curvilinear streets to Colorado Springs. You may notice here we have Willow Park. That's the predecessor to Monument Valley Park, and this is actually the route of Monument Creek. This is the northern section of that. There is no Alamosa Street. This is mostly Monument Valley Park here, but many of these west streets are visible. Okay, we're going to talk about eras and do a little bit of history. There are 3 eras in which the Near North End was built: the initial settlement, then Cripple Creek for the predominance of the buildings, and then pre and post-war. I selected these dates because we were founded in 1871. In 1893, it was a year with very little construction going on, and the boom in Cripple Creek didn't begin until 1894. We selected 1920 for the end of it because that's the post-war when the mines had shut down. Then, of course, the post-war era. Now, Colorado Springs was established as with no basic industry. It wasn't a railroad town. It didn't have a port. It didn't have resources to use. It didn't have mines. It was meant to be a nice place of well-to-do people that would support the local economy. And then the support commercial, the hotels and general stores and banks and newspapers then followed, and you need housing for people, as the buildings grew. Now, basic cabins and even tents were mixed in with Victorian housing in this initial era. The reliance on the wealthy as a business model was not very smart because you can't really bring in and spend enough money to keep a community healthy. And we were threatened by the panic of 1873. This was a home built by one of the town founders, Henry McAllister. It's the oldest house on its original lot. It was built in part to reassure investors that this was a solid community and a good place to live. This is another very old house built either sometime between 1887 and 1889. Lewis Whipple was a very popular builder in town. This was a gift to his daughter for her wedding. Kind of nice. Whipple and Robbie were the contractors for the Hageman Mansion. We'll get to that in a moment. This house was built by W. Knowlton. He operated Knowlton Dairy. This has a rare side entry on the house. There's only one other house in the near north end that has a side entry such as this. This is the home of Robert Crawford. He was originally identified as a miner. After a couple of years, he departed, and the occupant was David DeGraff. This is a lovely Italianate. David DeGraff was a character that came from the California goldfields. He discovered that there was a better way of extracting gold and doing it by selling goods to miners rather than digging it out of the ground. He followed that practice here in Colorado Springs, built the DeGraff building. Interestingly enough, the facade of this was reconstructed in the 60s or 70s. Edward Bumstead was a plumber with Bumstead and Best. Might point out that when we give a date for a house, that doesn't mean that the entire house was finished by that date. The existing house was present by that date, and there may be some additions to them that appear much more recent. This is the Hageman Mansion. J.J. Hageman came from Michigan. He was seeking the cure. He expected to die, and he came to Colorado Springs and started investing in railroads and mining stock. He built this as his own house. He owned the land between Cascade and Monument Valley Park. A contemporary of his, there's the carriage house. Kind of nice. A contemporary of his was Judson Moss Bemis. He was in manufacturing, came from the East. Bemis had patented the Bemis fold, a method of folding a round cylinder sack so you had a flat base. This was important in shipping sacks of flour, and Bemis got wealthy selling sacks of flour to the Union Army during the Civil War. It's now attached to another house on the end, to the north, and it's known as the Hearthstone Inn. Maybe something else soon. We had referenced the McAllister house. Flanking the McAllister house on both sides are some remarkable homes. They were all built by an architect by the name of Frank T. Lent. He was very popular, but he left in 1890, oddly enough, for his health. He had long and successful practice on the East Coast. You might note these 4 houses all designed by Frank, all in the same year, 1886. You take a look at the windows that he used, which is a highlight of the design. These next 2 buildings are the Pastorius houses. We will get to Francis' last home later, but he built 2 houses and designed them. They were commonly portrayed in some of the early print graphics of the city. This is the last house on the block, north of the McAllister house. And once again, the intricate use of window detailing is a characteristic. Lent most visible building is the old Colorado City Hall over on West Colorado Avenue. This is a boarding house, the Flansburgh boarding house. This was purpose-built as a boarding house. Now, there were many single-family homes that were turned into boarding houses, but this was designed for that. This was the Hazelhurst double house. Dr. Samuel Hazelhurst, I believe, was the grandfather of the current writer, newspaper editorialist, and past city councilman, John Hazelhurst. L.A. Peace was the architect. Peace and T.P. Barber, who we'll hear about later, the 2 of them designed St. Mary's Cathedral. Dudley was an attorney. He moved out after the following year, was replaced by Mr. Tilton, who was a merchant selling crockery and glassware. W.R. Shoup was a stockman. He was also the father of Oliver Shoup, who's the only Colorado Springs native that became governor of Colorado. This is the Titworth house. It's an example of a Georgian Foursquare. The 1-story version of this is a classic cottage, mostly notable because of the central dormer in the front-facing roof. Titworth was a merchant with Burgess Grocery. The Burgess house is up on North Nevada. Elias was a merchant. His trade was harness and saddlery. Now, Irving Halbert, switching gears, was a celebrated pioneer. He came here with his dad as a teenager. His father was a reverend, came in the gold rush. Irving was an astonishing individual. He helped General Palmer assemble the land for the town site. He was acclaimed the El Paso County clerk and recorder by voice vote at the age of 23. He later was First National Bank president on a couple of occasions and was a senator of the United States Senate, or no, the Colorado Senate. He had 2 sons. C.W. was in finance. He worked for First National Bank, and his older brother, living right next door, was Frank Halbert, and Frank followed in his dad's footsteps. At the time, he was the El Paso County deputy clerk and recorder. The Clark House down on St. Vrain was another instance of a double house. We didn't have names for duplex, but it was a double house. Very early, this house was divided from 2 units into 4. Elegant little wraparound house up on North Weber Street. Mr. Getz was the personal secretary to J.J. Hagerman. The buildings didn't need to be large. This was W. Ashton. He was a merchant with the Giddings brothers in Bent. The Gidding brothers lived on Nevada Avenue and were heavily involved in the Cripple Creek mining district. Dr. Spicer was a surgeon and a physician. That's out on Weber Street. Dr. Rose was a physician and a surgeon. This has an interesting angled dormer at a slant, which is different. Mr. McMillan established the J.P. McMillan mining real estate practice. A.J. Tucker was with First National Bank. This was designed by Peace and Barber. Construction in Colorado Springs was kind of steady, you can tell, up until about 1992. And I point out these are the surviving buildings. these weren't buildings that were present at the time. So these are the ones that survived. This is the period of Cripple Creek, beginning really in 1894 and extending all the way to 1920 over here. But the biggest period was between 1894 and 1902. Those 9 years saw the construction of 60% of the residential buildings in the near North End neighborhood. We're going into mining now. Gold was discovered in 1891, but it had little impact. There had been hoaxes before. Nobody thought it was really going to be a productive mining district. So there was uncertain, but a lot of locals went up, filed claims, and ended up becoming wealthy. In 1893, there was also the decline in silver demand due to congressional repeal of the Sherman Silver Act. So silver demand fell, gold increased. There was overconstruction of railroads, leading to several bankruptcies, which added to uncertainty. And then once all the silver mines in Colorado closed, all the miners came to Cripple Creek because that was a gold mine, quite literally. Rather than going through a year by year, I'm going to do by topics. This is mining. This was Dr. S.W. Morrison House. He was an eye and ear doctor. At the time he built this, he was the president of the Jackpot Mining Company. J.M. Alexander was mining. D. Wayland was the president of the Aola Gold Mining Company. John Manchester was a mining broker. He came from Maine and brought his friend G.L. Savage to design his house. Later on, Van Diest, Edmund Van Diest, who was Palmer's engineer and designed Monument Valley Park, lived in this house. This is the home of Samuel Bernard. He was a major owner of the Elkton Mine, which I think produced 7 millionaires in Colorado Springs. He and his brother were grocers before they went up, laid a claim to the Elkton Mine, which eventually in 1894 produced and became the largest, when it merged with Ed de la Verne's mine, it was one of the largest gold mines in Colorado. Will Wilson was a mining stockbroker. Arthur Peck and his son Frank were engaged in a real estate business in Colorado Springs prior to Cripple Creek. But when the boom occurred, Frank Peck went up and he was secretary to the Portland Gold Mining Company. And it was his money that built the house for his dad. Treat your children right. McReynolds was a civil and mining engineer. This was the home of Charles E. and Lydia Noble. They built this house and lived here only a couple of years. Noble was involved in several mines. Later on in 1909, they built the house directly to the east at 118 and 120 East Monument. The Bernard House, brother of Samuel over on Weber. He was another Elkton mine owner. Joseph Lilly was in real estate and a mining stockbroker with Wright Lilly and Company. John Burkholder was president of the Carey S. Gold Mining Company and also a mining stockbroker. Lewis Keyes was into mining. John Hardin was into real estate, but also the secretary and president for several gold mining companies. Walter S. Cash built a double house on Willamette. This is just east of the Hazelhurst house. The Hannon house, I'm kind of surprised. I would have guessed this would have been much older, but I could not find an older date for this. But Hannon was a mining stockbroker here in the Springs. And Frank Jeffrey was also involved in mining. I thought this was built as a boarding house due to the entry on the north on, I think it's Dale Street, but it wasn't. It was built as a single family house. So associated professions to mining were real estate, finance, and law. This is the home of Mr. Crowell. He was an attorney with Crowell and McGarry. One thing I might point out, when I give a date and an OE, that states that it's or earlier. That's the earliest date I found it. That doesn't mean that's when it was built. When the date doesn't have an OE after it, I've separately confirmed the date of that house. So Jehu Fields was a longtime attorney and became a judge here in Colorado Springs. Fred Long was a clerk. This is an example of the classic cottage, the Georgian four-square one-story version with the central dormer on the front. This has one on one side. There may be dormers on all sides, depending on what the builder wanted to do. Robert Lewis was an attorney. Francis Pastorius was an agent with multiple insurance companies. He was into real estate. He was into loans. He was president of the Colorado Investment and Realty Company. He designed this building himself. Really a marvelous building. Frank M. Woods over on Boulder. He and his brother owned Woods Investment Company. It's hard to say whether this should be mining or real estate. They owned the Jackpot Mining Company at this point, but earlier he and his brother had founded the town of Victor. And he and his brother were putting the hotel up in Victor, driving the shaft for the elevator, and they struck gold, which became the Gold Coin Mine. I got out of sequence. I was expecting something else. Oh, well, previous. There, we'll skip to it. We'll go to the merchants. This is the largest category in the city. This was W.S. Gandy. He was with Gandy and Slaughter. This is an example of the sleeping porch that would have been built for the treatment of people with tuberculosis. They would be unheated. Willis Vickers engaged in the trade of wholesale cigars. T.C. Beard was a proprietor of the Royal Grocery. The Royal Grocery, 1896, started off with fresh produce and a limited amount of other foods, now known as Stoner's Laundry. Farringer House was a manager of the Colorado Springs Drug Company. The Oppenheim brothers, they were clothiers and outfitters. Frederick Hastings was the architect for this house. This was a double house with each brother living on one side. Mr. Perry was a merchant with the Shields Morley Grocery. If you think this is impressive, you should see Mr. Shields and Mr. Morley's homes in the North End. This was another merchant with Shields Morley Grocery, W.H. Tucker. This is a house of W. Wyman, or H.W. Wyman. He was a jeweler. But I think more importantly, it was the home of Thomas McCaffrey, who was a pioneer printer. And I believe it was his granddaughter, Helen McCaffrey, was quite a leading citizen here in Colorado Springs and a supporter of preservation. This lovely house was the home of Albert Shapiro. He was involved in clothing and gentlemen's furniture. Herbert Strang was involved in selling sporting goods and cigars. I'm not sure I found the source of this. It seems to be a lot more elegant than a cigar wholesaler's home. The Mitchell house, this is the one I'd been looking for. Mitchell, I originally thought this was a merchant, but Mitchell was Horace H. Mitchell. He was owner of a gold mine. This house also housed multiple boarders while he was living there. The Purcell house, Mr. Purcell was the proprietor of Enterprise Furniture Company. Mr. Russell did stove repairs. Turning to builders, Charles Robertson was a carpenter. I believe this was a double house in its earlier incarnation, but it's quite elegant. This is the house of Frank Johnson. Frankie Johnson was a noteworthy builder. He built multiple properties in Colorado Springs, and we'll see several of them here. He built this house and the next house on East St. Vrain at the same time and claimed both of them as his residence. He designed his own buildings as well. He was not, it's improper to call him an architect. He never claimed to be an architect. In fact, it was very important when he was involved in a lawsuit over the Victoria Apartments, when he clearly identified he was not an architect and thus couldn't be accused of violating the architect's rules of ordering. So he also designed the Gladstone Apartments, 1909. The Crescent Apartments over on Boulder Crescent, and another home on Boulder Crescent that I had located. W.C. Johnson was a contractor that built many, many buildings in Colorado Springs, and he lived in this just for a short period of time. Then the Murray Apartments that I like to point out. This is really an elegant example of a two-story row apartments. It's unique, and I really love to see this buildings preserved. Boarding houses are particularly important, as I pointed out, in housing newcomers and visitors to the area. We didn't have all the Motel 6s in town, and so we had a number of them that were custom designed to be boarding houses. This is the one that's attached to the Hearthstone Inn on the north. Robert Waugh was a Civil War veteran. He had built this and started taking boarders very early. Mrs. Hudson, you can see how the homes were certainly significant enough that they're competing against each other for the best clients. Mrs. Graham's boarding house at 312 North Cascade, this had a wonderful revitalization effort. It had been covered with, I believe, asphalt shingles, and they restored, I believe, the original appearance. Euphemia Van Dusen, it's once again a very elegant property. Rush Kimball was actually a plumber, but he built this and took in boarders, presumably to engage in greater capitalism. I don't want to miss hitting a couple of small intact neighborhoods. I'd like to talk about one in the Boulder Crescent neighborhood. The area in blue is called Crosbyville. The area in green is called the White neighborhood, W-I-G-H-T. Crosbyville was built by William Crosby, who bought the entire area, and he designed these homes, intentionally creating a variety of housing styles to market his trade. He intended to be a home builder, and he built 5 homes fronting on Westview Place. They're all very, very nice. One of them was lost to the Marion House expansion. The White neighborhood to the east was completed in 1902 and 03. Crosby didn't have a great deal of success with his building company. The White neighborhood was built to create a series of tenant homes. These were not for purchase, but to generate a steady revenue stream. These homes all have the same interior design, but the exterior are all changed, and they're all in pretty good condition. The other neighborhood I'd like to point out is the Park Terrace Zyder Z neighborhood. Park Terrace is this street, and Zyder Z fronts on these 3 lots. Now, Zyder Z in Park Terrace is associated with Benjamin Lefkowsky. He was a Russian emigre who got out before the Russian Revolution. He spent some time in Texas and moved to Colorado Springs. He, excuse me, cut his teeth on developing by building the homes in the Park Terrace and Zuiderzee area. Did that between 1922 and 1927. Now, he bought the Hagerman Mansion in 1922 and he lived there. Later on, he ended up converting the Hagerman Mansion into apartments, which they have today. That was in 1928. And by 1931, he built the Russ Ammer Arms, or the Cascade Park Apartments. These are the homes in Park Terrace and Park Terrace that he had designed. We know he designed the three buildings on Zuiderzee. That fronts on Monument Valley Park. This is the longtime home of Peggy James, longtime newspaper writer. And we have two other houses. This one actually has a little bit of a windmill feature at the top that's visible from the back. Lefkowski did design the Jones house. He may have designed the remainder of these. I just need to take a look at the building permits and go back to see if there's some certainty in this. To sum up, what are the factors contributing to the intact nature of the near North End neighborhood? First off, it had quality materials and skilled craftsmen. We attracted a lot of people because the remainder of Colorado was undergoing hard times from the panic of 1893. We had people flooding to the area for employment, and they were very skilled. We don't have wet rot here in the Pikes Peak region, which is huge in terms of keeping our wooden buildings from deteriorating. The presence of the churches and the schools stabilized the neighborhood, particularly as a southern boundary. You have First Christian, First Methodist, you have First Congregational, All Souls, you have also Garfield School helped to stabilize. There wasn't any urban renewal that was triggered for the near North End, but most importantly, it's a steady investment and reinvestment over time by the property owner. Nothing is more important than that. And you know, the other factors help to create the context or the environment by which preservation could occur, but it's actually been done by the property owners. So, how'd I do?
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Very
Yes,
interesting.
thank you. Did everybody see their house? Everybody's like, yeah, I got my house.
I'm afraid we did not.
Excuse me?
I mean, it's yours is 1889 or 1899.
I'm gonna turn it on video.
The one over is 1901 in Emily's house.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I live at 1116 North Wasatch, and that's Olson's Plumbing's original house that he built.
Oh.
And his workshop that you see on his advertisement. Sadly, we had to tear that down 2 years ago because the tree he planted crushed it. But the original house is on Wasatch, and then behind it, which is interesting, is in 1893 was the original house on the land, and it was a gardener and then he went into carpentry. I guess he couldn't make enough money as a gardener. But yeah, so I didn't know if we would see it, but just to let you know that we do have his original house is still in town.
Thanks.
That's wonderful.
And we still have an original furnace downstairs.
I might add that due to time limits, I couldn't include all the houses I wanted to.
I know you couldn't.
There is a lot.
There is a lot. And that was a wonderful, wonderful job.
Yes.
Oh yeah. You know, if you think about it, we have 727 properties and 80% of them are over 50 and, you know, 225 are over 100 years old. So you could go on, Tim, forever, which is why we really want to focus on historic preservation. And so if anybody's interested, we would definitely like to, give info at Near North End. .org an email if you're interested in getting involved. And
Hi, everybody.
bye-bye.
Hey,
Oh,
Tim,
yes.
thanks. Good to see your face and hear your voice again. Thanks, everybody. This was a wonderful, wonderful meeting. Love you all.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
Dawn.
you.
So is there any other questions or comments anybody has?
Will you guys be sharing the recording or either of your slide decks with our email or?
I can, which reminds me, let me turn off the recording so that it doesn't keep. Let me see, let me stop the recording.
Yeah, Tim, that was just